I agree with what President Macron said. We certainly need to take steps forward. Certainly in Europe, on these strategic matters, we need to work together, but we must take steps forward. We have been a bit distracted. Perhaps we were a bit slow in the past, very often. But today we understand how our strategic dependencies are a risky problem. And so we are trying to build our capacity to defend ourselves, to build our capacity to be up to the challenges of this time, up to our task. And we are doing this on all major strategic issues.
Good evening, everyone. Liana Sciarra from Il Messaggero. To President Meloni, following Mark Rutte's interview on Fox, Tehran accused Italy this morning of being complicit, of being jointly responsible for the aggression against Iran. I wanted to understand how you respond to this accusation, and then how did the clarification with Rutte go? Have you formed an idea of how things went, given that today even Defense Minister Crosetto is speaking of random words? As for Macron, today Rubio reiterated that Trump is disappointed not only with Italy, but also with other European countries. I wanted to know if you discussed this among yourselves and how much the progressive detachment of the United States from Europe worries you. Thank you.
Thank you to you. So regarding Iran, look, what Minister Crosetto has already said applies. I have agreed with every word that Minister Crosetto has said between yesterday and today. We did not participate in the conflict in Iran. Besides, if we had participated in the conflict in Iran, forgive me, but one could not explain, let's say, this disappointment that is reiterated by the American president, as you know, very often. We have clearly honored our commitments by providing bases for activities that were not kinetic, but rather logistical and technical in nature. And when it was proposed, and you know this too because it has been widely reported, when requests were made that went beyond that scope, we did not grant the use, the authorization. As I repeat, it is widely known. So the government did exclusively what it stated in Parliament, as, moreover, Mark Rutte himself also confirmed yesterday from the Oval Office. The Secretary General, in his, let's say, enthusiastic, reconstruction, put together things that are actually different from each other, confusing the type of authorized flights, and he himself then corrected and clarified it. Minister Tajani spoke today with his Iranian counterpart, and it also seems that the Iranian side understood there was a misunderstanding from this point of view. After that, I cannot tell you how this simplistic reconstruction emerged. It is probably an attempt to best prepare for the next NATO summit, but in any case, I believe one must be cautious when discussing these matters.
Answer your question. I have believed for many years that we need a more sovereign, stronger, more independent Europe. In the military, technological, economic and food sectors, and so on. That is the guiding principle of the policy that we are pursuing, both in France and in Europe. Since 2022, this strategy of strategic autonomy has been adopted by the Europeans themselves, with Ukraine acting as an accelerator. And I believe the last 18 months have pushed Europeans to a new threshold. I welcome this. I also advocate for a strong European pillar within NATO. However, I am not in favor of distancing ourselves from the United States of America. Well, I think there were moments of uncertainty and distance that played out over the last 18 months regarding the Ukrainian issue and other matters, whether technological, economic or otherwise. Our duty is to constantly strengthen our independence to be less exposed to the volatility of any given decision. But it is everywhere we can to continue having the United States of America engaged with us, especially on issues where it has an important role to play. And that is why, in this capacity, I think that the G7 last week allowed for a very important reconvergence between Americans, Canadians, Japanese and Europeans. On the one hand, regarding the Ukrainian issue, since for the first time, the United States signed a text with us that clearly stated they are no longer neutral mediators, but that they support, alongside us, Ukrainian territorial sovereignty and territorial integrity, military capability, and energy support, as well as sanctions against Russia. That is a real change that brings them closer. In the same way, regarding the Middle East, we found paths of convergence from Hormuz to Lebanon, including the nuclear issue. And I also think that on the issue of rare earths and critical minerals, a subject we discussed under the Italian presidency, then under the Canadian presidency, we signed a very operational text with nearly 200 projects, a little over 60 billion euros in joint investments, which also signal a reconvergence between the Americans and the Europeans. So that is important. We must keep that, we must move forward. But we know there will likely be changes, new developments. Our role is, wherever we can, to keep the Americans with us, but every day to strengthen our...
Madame Prime Minister, Mr. President, Alison Tassin for Le Parisien. Mr. President, France is facing an unprecedented heat wave and, at the same time, its lack of preparation. We can see it. Schools cannot hold classes normally, children are sleeping on the floor with wet sheets, and in nursing homes, elderly people are suffering. We are very far from the energy renovation announcements you made 3 years ago. The Green Fund was also significantly cut last year. Has France fallen behind in the face of the climate change we are experiencing? And also, Madam President of the Council, when Marine Le Pen was convicted in the first instance, you lamented a problem for democracy. Will you still support her in about 10 days if she is convicted on appeal? Thank you.
The Prime Minister has already begun to describe everything that has been done, and rightly so, as have the ministers, whether it concerns hospitals, nursing homes, or the exceptional aid provided over these last few years to local authorities with the Green Fund. But before that, many others. And for several years now, we have supported a transition of our homes, our public buildings, and our public infrastructure that corresponds to adaptation. So, a great deal of work has been done. And I think honesty leads us to look at it, both in terms of the amounts invested and the real transformations, which have changed many things, which moreover have been supported by the commitment of many of our civil servants, whose role I want to salute, and of elected officials who have really done a very great job. Just before joining you, I was in Vélizy-Villacoublay, where I saw the remarkable work of the very committed municipal teams. Nevertheless, we have not finished the work. We must have that humility. For my part, I rather regret the choices that were made, but I believe that is part of democracy. You find that when I had an absolute majority, those funds were voted on. And then there were choices that were made which are the result of a compromise by a certain political group. Go see them to ask why they cut those funds. Now we must continue the work of adaptation. Now, beyond this necessary adaptation, which leads me to largely temper the excessive nature of your comments and refers you instead to both the facts and the reality of what has been conducted, we are living, and we must have the humility to see it, in a totally unprecedented period. We have adapted to global warming, but one cannot adapt to a peak that has no equivalent today in Europe and has never had an equivalent in our history. That is to say, a heat wave peak that lasts this long and is 15 degrees above normal averages. And so, faced with this, I really want to salute the organization of the government, of all the services, whether it be patients, rescue services, firefighters, volunteer firefighters, our security forces, the entire voluntary sector, volunteers, and local communities. It is a whole that comes to support, and so we protect there. That is the priority. First of all, there are prevention measures. You must remind everyone to drink regularly, not to exert themselves in the sun, to protect themselves as much as possible, and to adapt. Then, there is all the work we are doing at the hospital. I thank our nurses once again. It is also for this reason that we are led to adapt events or cancel them to reduce the potential additional burden on our hospitals. And we must continue to act as we are doing to support our hospitals, and the decisions announced this morning by the Prime Minister will allow for good organizational decisions to be made. And then we must be careful. We have also seen many cases of drowning, so we must reiterate messages of caution and continue the work of reaching out to the most vulnerable groups, which is being done with great commitment by the social, socio-health and healthcare sectors towards the elderly. And it is work that is obviously done by our nursing homes, but also by state services and local government services to go and check on everyone. And we all have a role to play at this time. These are moments of solidarity. I invite each of our compatriots to check if an elderly neighbor who lives alone or has a disability is being supported. These are moments of solidarity and mobilization that must define these periods. And that is what is happening. So I am very grateful for all the efforts mobilized, and I invite everyone, well, to take care of themselves and take care of others and get through this phase. But we continue to be mobilized, and the government will announce new measures tomorrow. I do not want to go into more detail here. Just before taking off, I spoke with the Prime Minister, who is preparing tomorrow's meeting, where he will announce new measures.
Look, regarding your question about Marine Le Pen, I do not know the legal terms of the case against Marine Le Pen, and I am not able to judge them. I can judge the politician, and I have respect for Marine Le Pen, as I have respect for anyone who has the consent of the citizens, because that is how democracy works. I can tell you that I am someone who does not automatically believe everything I read, because I remember what was written about me before I became president of the Council of Ministers, and so I prefer to look into things before judging others. And I can say that, in any case, I do not think I am in a position to tell the French what is best for their future and for them, because I did not believe it when it was done to me and to the Italian people.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Francesca Bonzi, TGCom24 Mediaset. Prime Minister Meloni, I would like to return to the Middle East, to Lebanon. Italy and France have made an important decision today, which is to create a new Franco-Italian-led coalition for the post-UNIFIL mission. If you could provide some more details, President Macron, essentially the same question for you. Furthermore, the issue of countries wishing to join this initiative of yours will soon arise. I hope the United States will be a part of it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. Let us start with the necessity we have. We clearly have the need not to leave a void that could be dangerous when the UNIFIL mission ends at the end of this year. And so, the first necessity we have is to guarantee the continuity of an international presence. Let us start from the assumption that, given the work of Italy and France and the historical presence in Lebanon that Italy and France have had over the past years, they are two nations that can naturally lead an international coalition in this sense, also building on what has already been done in recent years regarding the Military Technical Committee. In short, we are not starting from scratch. The goal must remain to ensure that the Lebanese government has, let's say, the monopoly on the use of force and control over the entire territory. I think we all need, at this stage, to thank President Aoun for the significant efforts he is making. Clearly, the dialogues taking place in Washington are very important and make a difference, also held directly between Lebanon and Israel, which are another very important initiative that we must support. And what we would like to do is imagine to launch an international initiative, therefore an international summit in which we can certainly involve many European partners and the various partners in the region from whom we cannot disregard to give life to an initiative of this kind. Madam President has just described the approach. We know that the United Nations mandate for UNIFIL ends at the end of the year, and that from August, if we do nothing, the first measures to disengage will be mechanically taken. Therefore, it is important to build a perspective. And so, together, we will first work with the Lebanese authorities, the President, the Head of Government, the Minister of Defense, and the Lebanese Army Chief of Staff to build a solution that supports the Lebanese armed forces and security forces. And on that basis, we will try to build the broadest coalition and indeed to build a clear mandate. Will it be the mandate of a multinational force alongside the Lebanese armed forces? Will we be able to build it with a real United Nations mandate? It is too early to answer that question. But obviously our wish is to have the most everyone in such a coalition, because Lebanese sovereignty, the territorial integrity of Lebanon, and the implementation of what President Aoun decided on his first day in office, and what Prime Minister Nawaf Salam builds every day, that is to say, the monopoly of arms in the hands of the Lebanese armed forces, and therefore the disarmament of Hezbollah. For that, we must support the armed forces. And so, this cooperation regarding the UNIFIL post is what we are launching. I also want to salute the role that Qatar and Saudi Arabia are playing in the region to support Lebanon. And we will have the opportunity in the coming days to also have elements of support with Saudi Arabia for the Lebanese armed forces in the very short term. But all of this makes sense if we can build the post-UNIFIL perspective. That is what we have decided to do together, Italy and France. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have reached the end of this press conference. I would like to thank the President and her delegation once again. I thank you all and salute the resilience of the Italian delegation, which had the sun facing us throughout the entire press conference. The foliage provided a sort of temporary respite for the French delegation. So please excuse me for this involuntary torture session.
Grazie a tutti.